Many old people talk to themselves. Not loudly, not always in full sentences. Sometimes just a whisper. Sometimes just moving their lips. Sometimes saying small things like, "Where did I keep that? Okay. Now this. Yes. I remember." Have you ever seen this? Have you ever wondered why it happens? Is it confusion? Is it memory loss? Or is there something deeper going on inside the mind? Because this behavior is not as strange as it looks. In fact, it has meaning, real psychological meaning. Let's begin with something simple. Thinking. When people are young, most thinking happens silently, inside the mind, fast, automatic. But as people age, that silent thinking begins to slow down. The brain takes a little more time to process information, to remember, to organize thoughts. So what does the brain do? It shifts part of that thinking. From inside to outside, words become spoken, thoughts become audible. Because speaking helps the brain stay organized. It is like hearing your own mind to understand it better. So when an older person says, "Now I will put this here," they are not talking randomly. They are guiding themselves, helping their mind stay focused. Now think about this. Have you ever talked to yourself while doing something important? Maybe when you were searching for something or trying to remember a detail, you said it out loud. Why? Because it helps. It makes thinking clearer. For older people, this becomes more common, not because something is wrong, but because it supports the brain. Now let's go deeper. Memory. As people age, short-term memory becomes weaker, not completely gone, but less reliable. So the brain creates small support systems. Talking is one of them. When they say something out loud, they are reinforcing it, making it easier to remember, almost like leaving a small trail behind, so they don't lose their place. Now imagine this situation. An older person walks into a room and forgets why they came there. It happens. Very common. So what do? They start speaking softly. "I came here for something. What was it?" They are not lost. They are searching, and speaking helps them stay connected to the task. Now here is another layer. Loneliness. This one is deeper and more emotional. As people grow older, their social circle becomes smaller. Less daily conversation, less interaction, less back and forth communication, and human beings are not designed for silence. The brain expects communication. It expects response. It expects presence. So when that presence is missing, the mind tries to fill the gap. How? By creating its own conversation. Not imaginary voices, but self-dialogue, talking to oneself, to feel less alone, to keep the mind active, to maintain a sense of connection, even if it is with oneself. Now ask yourself, is it really strange? Or is it a form of adaptation? Because in many ways, it is the brain's way of coping. Now let's look at something very human. Habits. People who have spent years talking to others, giving instructions, sharing thoughts, do not suddenly stop needing that expression. That habit stays, even when people around them reduce. So the mind continues the pattern, speaking, explaining, reacting, even if no one is physically there. Now think about someone who spent years taking care of a family, guiding children, managing a home, giving constant direction. That voice does not just disappear. It remains inside, and sometimes it comes out, quietly, naturally. Now here is something very important. Control. When a person speaks their thoughts, they feel more in control of their actions, especially when the mind feels slower, uncertain. Speaking creates structure. It creates a sense of order. First I do this, then I do that. It reduces confusion and brings stability. So this behavior is not random. It is functional. Now let me ask you something. If talking to yourself helps you stay clear, helps you remember, helps you feel less alone, would you stop doing it? Or would you continue? Because it works. This is exactly what happens. Now look at this from another angle. Emotion. Older people carry a lifetime of experiences, thoughts that were never fully expressed, feelings that were never shared completely, memories that still live inside. And sometimes, these thoughts need a way out, not always to another person, but simply out. So they speak, not to be heard, but to release. A quiet, emotional release. Now imagine sitting alone, thinking about the past, a conversation that once happened, something you wish you had said differently, and suddenly, you say it out loud, softly, almost like correcting the past. This happens more often than people realize, and with age, it becomes more visible. Now here is something most people misunderstand. They see an older person talking to themselves, and they assume something is wrong. But in many cases, nothing is wrong. In fact, something is working. The mind is adapting, adjusting, finding ways to stay active, stay clear, stay connected, even in a quieter world. So the next time you see this, pause for a moment. Don't judge it quickly. Don't label it. Instead, ask yourself, what role is this playing in their life right now? Because behind that soft voice, there is a system trying to support itself, a mind trying to stay steady, a person trying to stay connected in their own way. And over time, this quiet talking becomes more natural, more frequent, almost like a second way of thinking. They don't even notice it anymore. It just happens. While walking, while sitting, while doing small tasks. A few words here, a small sentence there, like a soft background voice. Now here is something deeper, inner voice. Everyone has it. That voice inside the mind, that speaks without sound, guides decisions, reminds, questions. But as people age, the boundary between inner voice and outer voice becomes thinner. What was once silent now sometimes comes out. Not fully, not loudly, just enough to be heard. And this is not loss of control. It is a shift in expression. The mind is still working, just using a different path. Now think about attention. Younger minds can hold many thoughts at once, fast switching, quick focus. But older minds prefer one thing at a time, slow, steady, clear. So when they speak their thoughts, they are narrowing focus, reducing confusion, staying present in the task, instead of losing track. Now imagine doing something simple, like making tea. For a younger person, it happens automatically, no need to think out loud. But for an older person, they may say, first water, then tea, then sugar. Not because they don't know, but because they are keeping the sequence alive, preventing small mistakes, staying connected to each step. Now here is something emotional again. Familiar voices, people who are no longer there, still exist in memory very clearly, sometimes so clearly that it feels like they are still part of daily life. So an older person may say something like, "Okay, I'm coming," or "Yes, I know," not because someone is physically there, but because their mind is replaying connection, continuing a relationship that once was real. This is not illusion, it is emotional continuity, the brain holding on to bonds, keeping them alive in its own way. Now ask yourself, is that strange? Or is that deeply human? Because relationships don't just disappear, they change form, and sometimes they live on through these quiet moments. Now there is another subtle reason: silence. Long silence affects the mind. Too much quiet can feel heavy, unnatural. So the brain creates small sounds, small words, to break that silence, to feel alive, to feel active, even if no one responds. Because complete silence is not always comfortable. Now think about confidence. As people age, they may begin to doubt small things. Did I do this right? Am I forgetting something? So they speak their thoughts to reassure themselves. Yes, this is correct. Okay, done. This builds a small sense of certainty, a small sense of control, without needing validation from others. Now imagine living in a space where you cannot always rely on your memory fully, where things take a little longer, where distractions can confuse you. Wouldn't you create your own way to stay steady? This is exactly that. A personal system. Simple, but effective. Now here is something most people miss. Older people are not always talking to themselves. Sometimes, they are talking with themselves. There is a difference. Talking to yourself feels like instruction, but talking with yourself feels like companionship, a gentle presence, a quiet partner in thought. And when life becomes quieter, this companionship becomes valuable, very valuable, because it fills space, it keeps the mind moving, it prevents complete isolation. Now think about this carefully. If a person spends many hours alone, day after day, year after year, their mind will not stay silent forever. It will create interaction, because interaction is a human need. So instead of seeing this as something strange, see it as something adaptive, something meaningful, a way of staying mentally active, a way of staying emotionally balanced, a way of staying connected, even in a quiet world. And sometimes, if you listen closely, those soft words carry stories, memories, pieces of a life, still moving forward in its own quiet way, just waiting for someone to notice. And as this continues, something very quiet begins to form. Comfort, not loud comfort, not visible from the outside, but a small inner stability. They begin to rely on their own voice, to guide, to calm, to stay present. It becomes familiar, predictable, safe, because in a world that keeps changing, their own voice remains the same. Now think about uncertainty. Aging brings many small uncertainties. Names take longer to recall, tasks take longer to complete, decisions take a little more time, and uncertainty creates tension, a slight unease inside. So what does the mind do? It tries to reduce that tension by speaking, by confirming, by repeating. Okay, this is right. Yes, I remember. These small words, they are not random, they are stabilizers. They bring the mind back into balance. Now imagine a moment of confusion, something simple but unclear. Instead of staying stuck, they speak it out, they hear it, they process it, and slowly, clarity returns. This is why talking to oneself often increases during moments of focus or moments of doubt, because the brain is actively working and it needs support. Now, there is something deeper still, emotional processing. Not all feelings are easy to share, especially with age. Some thoughts feel too personal, too heavy, too difficult to explain. So instead of speaking to others, they speak softly to themselves, a quiet release, a way to let emotion move without needing an audience. Now think about grief. Not always fresh grief, but old grief, the kind that stays quietly in the background. Memories of people, moments that are gone, words that were never finished. And sometimes, these memories come back unexpectedly while sitting alone, while doing nothing. And in that moment, a few words come out, softly, almost like a reply to the past. This is not confusion. This is connection, a connection that time could not fully erase. Now, let me ask you something. If a person carries a lifetime inside them, where do all those thoughts go? Do they just disappear? Or do they find small ways to come out, piece by piece? This is one of those ways. Now there is one final layer, presence. Talking to oneself keeps a person anchored in the present moment. It prevents the mind from drifting too far, too deep into memory, too far into worry. It keeps them here, now, in this moment. And for an older mind, this is very important, because drifting too much can create confusion, can create emotional heaviness. So the voice becomes an anchor, a gentle way of staying connected to reality. Now bring everything together. Slower thinking, memory support, reduced social interaction, emotional release, habit from the past, need for control, need for presence. All of this comes together in one simple behavior, talking to oneself. But behind that simple behavior, there is intelligence, adaptation, survival. Now here is the most important part: how we respond. When people see this, they often react in two ways. They ignore it, or they judge it. Both create distance, but there is another way, a better way, a more human way, to gently enter their world, not by stopping them, not by correcting them, but by joining them. If they say something softly, you respond softly. If they are speaking while doing something, you stay near, you listen, you become part of that moment. And something beautiful happens. Their self-talk slowly turns into shared talk. Their quiet world opens just a little because someone stepped in without breaking it. Now imagine this, an older person speaking softly, and instead of being alone in that moment, someone is there, listening, responding, understanding. That small shift changes everything, because in the end, they were never trying to be alone. They were just adapting to a world that had become quieter. And if someone brings back even a little sound, a little presence, a little connection, that quiet voice no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like life, still moving, still speaking, still waiting to be heard. And in the end, it comes down to something very simple. They are not losing their mind. They are using it differently. What looks unusual from the outside feels normal from the inside, because their world has changed, quieter, slower, more internal. And in that world, their own voice becomes a companion, not a problem, a support. Now think about this gently. A person who once had constant conversation, family, friends, daily interaction, now sits in longer periods of silence. Do you expect the mind to just accept that silence without creating something to fill it? It doesn't. It adapts. It speaks. It keeps itself company. Now there is something very important to understand. Older people don't always need to be corrected. They need to be understood. Because when you interrupt them suddenly, when you say, "Why are you talking to yourself?" you break something, a flow, a comfort, a quiet system they have built for themselves. And in that moment, they may stop speaking, but they also become more closed, more distant. So the goal is not to stop this behavior. The goal is to understand its purpose and respond with care. Now imagine a different response. You hear them speaking softly. Instead of correcting, you sit beside them, you listen, you gently join. What are you thinking about? Or even just a simple yes. And suddenly, they are not alone in that moment anymore. That small shift turns self-talk into connection, without force, without pressure. Now here is the deepest truth. Talking to oneself is not always about being alone. Sometimes it is about staying connected. When connection becomes less available, it is about keeping the mind alive, keeping thoughts moving, keeping emotions from becoming too heavy, because silence, when it becomes too long, can feel like emptiness, and the human mind does not like emptiness. It fills it in whatever way it can. Now ask yourself honestly, if you were in the same place, less conversation, more quiet, more time with your own thoughts, would your mind stay silent, or would it begin to speak just a little to keep you company? This is not strange. This is human. Now bring everything together. Slower thinking, need for clarity, memory support, habit from a lifetime of speaking, emotional release, loneliness, need for presence. All of this lives inside that one simple act, talking softly to oneself. And once you see it this way, it no longer looks unusual. It looks meaningful. It looks like a mind, still trying, still adapting, still finding ways to stay connected to life, even when life becomes quiet. So the next time you hear those soft words, don't rush to stop them. Don't label them. Pause, listen, and understand. That voice is not a sign of loss. It is a sign of continuation, a quiet way of saying, I am still here.